I'm going to keep this straightforward because I know a lot of you have been scrolling past the hype and wondering if a 32-inch 4K Qd-OLED from Alienware is really worth the premium price tag. The big question most of us face is whether the monitor will actually improve the things we do day-to-day, whether that's long gaming sessions, color-critical work, or just a nicer desktop for binge watching. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First, let's talk about the core dilemma. A monitor that advertises Qd-OLED and 38402160 sounds like a tech-savvy way to guarantee perfect blacks and vibrant colors, but those words don't automatically translate to a better experience for everyone. The real risk is spending a lot of money on a screen that looks stunning on paper but ends up being underutilized or, worse, introduces new annoyances like burn-in or a cramped ergonomics setup. Who should actually consider the Alienware Aw3225Qf? If you're a gamer who plays fast-paced shooters or racing titles and you already have an RTX 4000 series or comparable graphics card, the combination of a 32-inch panel, 4K resolution, and the quick response that OLED provides can make a noticeable difference. The deep blacks let you spot enemies in dark corners more easily, and the color accuracy is solid enough that you won't need a separate calibration step for most titles. Content creators who need a wide color gamut for photo or video editing will also appreciate the Qd-OLED's ability to reproduce a larger slice of the DCI-P3 space, which means the footage you edit looks closer to what you'll see on a calibrated broadcast monitor. On the flip side, if you're mainly using a monitor for office work, spreadsheets, and occasional video streaming, the premium price starts to feel less justified. You'll still get a beautiful picture, but you won't be leveraging the high refresh rates, low input lag, or the extreme contrast that OLED delivers. Likewise, folks who still run on mid-range GPUs may find they can't hit native 4K at high frame rates, which defeats part of the appeal of this size and resolution. In those cases, a good 1440p IPS panel would probably give you more frames per second for the same money. Now, let's dive into what the monitor actually does in a real-world setup. I placed the Aw3225Qf on a typical desk with a dual monitor arm, because the stand is fairly bulky and doesn't swivel as freely as many gamers would like. The arm solved that problem, but it does add an extra cost if you don't already have one. Once mounted, the 32-inch screen fills your field of view nicely without feeling overwhelming, which is a sweet spot for immersive gaming and also for multitasking with several windows open. The 4K resolution makes text razor-sharp, so reading code or long documents becomes less of a strain, assuming you keep the scaling at a comfortable level. One of the practical strengths that shows up day after day is the OLED's perfect black level. In a dim room, watching a movie with heavy shadow scenes feels like the picture is actually alive. There's no gray washout that you'd see on a VA panel. For gamers, that translates to clearer visual cues in darker maps. The Qd component pushes the color volume further than a standard OLED, so you get more saturated reds and greens without the color banding you sometimes see on older panels. I tested a few HDR titles, and while the monitor doesn't hit the 1000 nit peak that some high-end HDR TVs claim, the HDR effect still looks more vivid than on most LCDs at a comparable price point. On the downside, there are a couple of trade-offs that are easy to overlook until you start using the monitor for extended periods. First, OLED panels are still susceptible to image retention if you leave static UI elements on the screen for a long time. Think of a persistent HUD in a game or a toolbar that never moves. Alienware includes a pixel shift feature that moves the image slightly every few minutes, which mitigates the risk, but it's something to be aware of if you work with always-in software. Second, power consumption is higher than a typical LED LCD, especially at bright settings. If you keep the monitor at max brightness for a long movie marathon, you'll notice a modest increase in your electricity bill compared to a standard 4K IPS display. Another practical consideration is the connectivity. The Aw3225Qf offers a single DisplayPort 1.4 and two HDMI 2.1 ports, which means you can hook up a next-gen console and a PC simultaneously without swapping cables. However, the HDMI ports are limited to 60 Hz at 4K, so if you wanted a 120Hz gaming experience from a console, you'd need to drop down to 1440p or use the DisplayPort connection. That isn't a huge limitation for most PC gamers, but console users should factor it in when planning their setup. When it comes to value beyond the headline specs, the monitor's built-in calibration profile is worth mentioning. Alienware ships it with a factory-tuned picture mode that targets Adobe RGB, which saves you the time of manually tweaking.